everyone. We will give a few more minutes for those who are still joining in. So just settle in, take your drink or whatever you're having right now, coffee, tea. We're going to start in about 2 minutes. Thank you. All right, great. I think we are ready. I see all the panelists have been already spotlighted here. Thank you very much, everyone, for waiting. Welcome to our Kick-off Webinar for our Green Hospitality Hackathon and Innovation Night that is coming up later in July. Thank you so much for connecting. We had actually quite a number of registrations from different places. So if you're now with us, you can also share in the chat where you're connecting from. I counted about 15 different places outside of Hong Kong. So that's fantastic. And I really appreciate that. So no matter where you are, I hope you're going to have a great session. And the purpose of today's session is going to be really to learn a little bit more about the challenges that we want to solve in our hackathon. And we're going to have 4 fantastic speakers to actually share a little bit about their areas of expertise. And I'm really excited to learn more. So if you're just connecting, please do tell us hi from wherever you are, share with us a little bit more where you're connecting from, and also test the chat function to see how you can use it later for the questions. All right, so let me jump into it. Well, welcome again. My name is Lucia. I am the Executive Director of Green Hospitality. I'm going to be hosting today's session. Just before we go into it, I would like to mention that this program we are running is funded by the Innovation Technology Commission of Hong Kong, and we are very grateful for that support. Would like to also acknowledge our different partners that have made this program a success so far. So our venue sponsor, Eaton Club, and our program partner, the Hong Kong Park of Science and Technology, Invest Hong Kong, Food Panda, Chomp, and many other partners who will be also speaking today from different places like Brinc or HK Rita and other partners that you will meet during this program if you're going to continue into the innovation part of the hackathon. So we really appreciate all the support to our community partners, to our content partners to create these fantastic sessions, and also to spread the word and get you all into the room for innovating on sustainability solutions. So before we go into the actual topics, let me just briefly introduce to you Green Hospitality. You might not have yet heard of us. So I'd like to just say a few words. Our mission is really to find sustainable solutions for the hospitality and travel industry. And we would like to help in different areas. So you can see on the screen different focus areas that we look at. So maybe many of you might think sustainability is only looking at the environmental aspect, but we also look at the human aspect of sustainability. So you can see whether we look at the employment and empowerment, we look at, of course, environmental conservation, responsible consumption, production, but also the governance. And we would like to take the action now because we have climate emergency. So we recognize that we have to take the action faster. So what we really do and how we work, we are a nonprofit organization based here in Hong Kong. We work with different partners really across the board, from businesses to nonprofits, to entrepreneurs and startups, and to government or academic institutions, because we recognize everybody has to really work together to bring about these solutions. And so we collaborate on knowledge sharing and research, finding the innovations together, collaborating, creating partnerships, and so on. So we have 3 themes in our hackathon. So let me introduce you the themes slightly. Well, sorry, we have 1 theme and 3 challenges in this theme. So the theme for this year's hackathon is the circularity for hospitality. We would like to see how we can transform waste into innovative and marketable products and solutions. And under this theme, we have 3 challenges that we're looking at that recognize that there are potentially some opportunities for the hospitality industry to provide, so to say, raw materials for these innovations. And that's textile, that's food technology, and also packaging solutions. So a little bit over the hackathon timeline. What are you going to do if you stay with us and join the whole program besides this kickoff session? So today we are at the number 1, the kickoff webinar. We hope that you're going to learn about these different challenges a little bit more and what kind of innovation is happening. Second will be a training or a couple of trainings actually that we have lined up for you in May. One of them will be on the design thinking, and another one will be on pitching. So you will have a chance as well to polish some of these skills. We have fantastic actually mentors who are ready to help you to really succeed and improve your current pitch, or even learn how to make one if you have not done so before. And we're also going to have mentors besides these workshops. So there will be mentors available besides these 2 workshops who will then have specific expertise on a particular topic. So we will make them available to you. You will be able to schedule some meetings with them to consult your particular idea and see, what kind of opportunities to develop it better there are. And then in June, actually, we will have a semifinals. We will have a pitch day on the 18th of June. So you will have a chance to actually showcase your group project, your group product to the panel of judges in the semifinals. And then the shortlisted innovations, so the top few will be then invited into the innovation night to actually find a winner out of all your projects. So I think this is something interesting that maybe you are looking forward to and hope to get to. So these are the prizes that we have lined up for you. I think one of the very interesting ones is definitely the entry into the Hong Kong Science Park and Technology Ideation Program and entry to the Hong Kong market. Of course, that would really depend on the terms and conditions, whether you actually are eligible for that. But if you are from Hong Kong and in Hong Kong, for sure, this is a huge opportunity that you can get from this program. We also will offer some seed money for the winning team. And for those of you who are in the student category, we will also have the internships opportunities at the Mills, Fabrica, and Green Hospitality for you. And for those who are in the category below 18 years old, who would not be eligible for the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park program, we have also sponsorship from Food Panda and some coupons and vouchers for you guys. All right, so a little bit about the Hong Kong Science Park Ideation Program. So it is composed of seed funding of 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. So that's a financial grant to develop your idea further. So that potentially could really start off your time at this hackathon and actually really translate it into a real market solution. And you will also receive coaching from mentors, and you will receive the business advice on how to actually make your idea a real business. And you will be also able to use the center facilities at the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. And there are also some trainings provided inside the Hong Kong Science Park ecosystem of startups. They host startups at different level of their development, so to say. So you will also be able to network and get to know the other young entrepreneurs or other entrepreneurs in general that are hosted at the Hong Kong Science Park Technology. Okay, so that was a little bit on the logistics side of the things. To brief you a little bit more about the hackathon, if you have not had a chance to look at our website yet. And now I would like to go actually into the knowledge sharing today, because that's why we are here, and not for me to talk about the program only, but you actually are interested, I'm sure, about the topics, about the challenges that could then maybe help you define your ideas better, or discover what already is out there and where you see the gaps for you to innovate. So we have the Fantastic Four here. We have Dr. Shauhrat Chopra, Assistant Professor from the School of Energy and Environment at CityU. Hi, Shauhrat. And we also have Sonalie Figueiras, founder and CEO of Green Queen, Eco Warehouse, and SourceGreenPackaging.com. Hi, Sonalie. We have Natalie Long, Program Manager, Food Technology Accelerator Program at Brinc Hong Kong. Hi, Natalie. And I can't see Angus here yet. Maybe he doesn't fit into the screen, but we're also going to hear from, oh, there you are. We will hear from Angus Tsang, Research and Investment at the Mills Fabrica. So each of the speakers has a specific knowledge that they can share with you. And after each of their contributions that we're going to hear, we will also have a chance to ask a few questions. So if you hear anything you're curious about, I'll encourage you to put that down in the chat. We'll be happy to take in your questions at the end of each speaker's presentation. All right, so without further ado, I would like to have Dr. Shauhrat Chopra as a first speaker. And while the screen loads, I will say a few words about his background. So as I mentioned, Dr. Shauhrat Chopra is an assistant professor in the School of Energy and Environment at CityU, and he will explain the concept of resource circularity and how it can be achieved by sustainable product design and life cycle assessment. A little bit about his background. Shauhrat is or obtained a Master's of Science in Systems Biology from the University of Hyderabad in India, and he received his PhD in Civil and Environmental Engineering from the Swenson School of Engineering at the University of Pittsburgh, USA. His dissertation work focused on the resilience of complex systems, including economic systems, industrial symbiosis, and critical infrastructure system at urban and national levels. Before joining the School of Energy and Environment, Dr. Chopra worked as a researcher at the Institute for Environmental Science and Policy at the University of Illinois in Chicago, where he researched or focused on sustainable design of future transformative nano-enabled products. I really don't know what that means, so Shauhrat, you can use your time to explain that because it's a mouthful, really. But I know that you are very passionate about circularity and circular economy, and that's why you are our first speaker today to set this little bit the scene as to what is circular economy, how we can achieve it, what have you found out from your research. So floor is yours.
Sounds good. I'm going to share my screen very quickly. All right, I think you should be able to see it now. Hi, everybody. I'm Shauhrat. You can call me Shaw or Dr. Chopra. So I'm going to be talking about life cycle perspective for the circular economy. So I guess you've seen this diagram before. This is known as the butterfly diagram. This was produced by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that has spearheaded the work on circular economy in the past decade. The main idea that I would like to for you to take away here are two things. First is that there are a lot of new waste valorization approaches being developed. So these are technologies. You can think about, upcycling plastics or valorizing waste streams like food waste or textile waste into value-added products. All of these, there are a lot of innovation happening in the waste valorization side. But then there's also a rapid evolution of how our what is contained or composed in our waste streams. As we change our habits of what we consume, our waste streams are changing. So you can imagine how quickly we're changing our consumption patterns. So the waste that is coming out is also going to be changing very rapidly. So what we need is to be able to make sure that we are making sustainable choices while moving into the circular economy. And so we don't want to have issues. And so in order for that, we need to make sure that we can maximize circularity using systems approaches, which means that we want to optimize the waste valorization technologies that are coming out. So it can be recycling technologies for cotton or polyester, and further reduce the environmental impacts associated with it, because everything recycled does not naturally mean that it's sustainable, right? So recycling itself has carbon emissions associated with it. And then the other idea is that we need to be able to do benchmarking. So we should be able to do comparative analysis of the different value-added products that are coming out of the different technologies that you can apply, given the fact that you could use food waste to produce 10 different products, given the technological advances that we've made in the past few years. So you can just basically understand that for the local environment, for the local economic environment, you need to be able to identify which technological pathway will be providing you the most amount of value add. The challenge with any emerging field is that there are considerable chances of making regrettable substitutions. These are any replacements of materials that we have or use with ones that are even worse than what we were previously using. This is pretty much the case with what we had in gasoline previously. We moved away from ethyl gasoline to MTBE-based gasoline. Soon realized that the MTBE, the material, the toxin, is actually equally or even in some cases much more worse than the chemical that it was replacing. This is also in the case of bisphenol A in our plastic bottles. We thought that we should get rid of BPA, and we put in BPS. BPS is worse off than BPA. We make these decisions very hastily without realizing that these will have repercussions, and we need to make sure that that doesn't happen with circular economy initiatives. And similarly, the situation can very quickly turn when folks realize that there's greenwashing associated with circular economy, and that can result in public perception risk. Something similar to what happened with GMO. Whatever value that technology had was lost because of the poor public perception that came across, but because of the initial few decisions that were taken in the scale-up of the technology. So then how do we ensure circular economy initiatives don't suffer the same fate? Well, the solution behind that is we need to take a systems approach. We need to think about industries or industrial systems as mimic around the idea of the ecosystem, right? How we don't have any waste in ecosystems, the same way we want to have industrial systems behaving in such a way that there is no waste created. There's always value being generated. And for that, the field that I belong to is industrial ecology. And we take a very systems perspective. So here I specifically talk about life cycle thinking, which basically goes beyond the traditional approach of focusing on one phase of the life cycle of a product at a time and trying to optimize it. A lot of times we try to fix the production phase, but we are actually displacing the impacts from the production to recycling. That happens a lot. You try to put in a new material, trying to make it more carbon efficient. You realize that end of life, it produces more impacts. So you can't really be making decisions about sustainability without taking the entire system into account. And for that reason, life cycle assessment becomes a very valuable tool. What life cycle assessment precisely does is it accounts for all of the inputs and outputs associated with each and every stage of the uh, life cycle of a product. This could be, in this case, I've taken the example of a cotton t-shirt, but you can imagine anything possible. You could do a life cycle assessment for it. Now, the benefit of life cycle assessment is that it does not only focus on carbon, right? The challenge is that we very quickly can be bought into the idea of what is trending. Right now, carbon is trending, so we all talk about carbon, but there are other types of environmental impacts that we need to care about. And as Lucia pointed out before, sustainability is not just environmental impacts, there are social and economic factors as well. And life cycle perspectives allow us to account for these impacts as well across the life cycle of a product, technology, process, whatever that we are looking at. So let me give you an example of why we are looking at life cycle assessment when talking about waste and circular economy. Well, we had a very interesting problem. We had this problem of we could convert organic waste, so that's basically textile waste, bakery waste, food waste, into a sophorilipid. A sophorilipid is a biosurfactant. You can think of it as a detergent. You must have seen some of these bio-based detergents in the market. Basically, these bio-based detergents are made by these really fantastic microorganisms called Starmorella bombicola. I love their name, so I love to say it out loud. This microorganism is basically allowing us to convert the waste stream into a product, a value-added product that we sell. Now, the question is, how do we, for the first question is, well, which waste stream do you select? So for that, we do a life cycle assessment, looking at all of the phases of the production of the biosurfactant here. And we find that converting food waste to sophorolipids make the most amount of sense, especially in Hong Kong. And this is very important. When we had looked at the same production of sophorolipids in Belgium, we found that the composition of our waste stream was very different. In Asia, we have a carbohydrate-rich waste stream, right, with the amount of rice that goes into the waste stream, which meant food waste conversion into sophorolipids made more sense, whereas in Belgium, that was not the case, right? So that's the perspective that we need to bring. We need to be thinking about local environment, local perspective, because your inputs are going to be very different depending on the local situation, as well as the market situation, right? You can think about, is there a market for detergents? May not be everywhere, but in Hong Kong, definitely there is one. Now, I've given you an example of a life cycle assessment study that you could look at from an environmental perspective. Here, I was showing you global warming potential or greenhouse gases. But you could also think about life cycle sustainability assessment, where you're not just taking into account the environmental LCA, but also the life cycle costing, as well as the social life cycle assessment associated with the product. So the question is that once you finish your first life of a product, there are multiple decisions that you could take in terms of how do you valorize this technology, and what the approach that one might want to take is the life cycle sustainability assessment. Well, what does this mean? Life cycle sustainability assessment allows us to look at various different indicators, not just focusing on the environmental indicators that are related to, say, ozone depletion, global warming potential, smog, acidification, etc., but also look into social indicators like access to tangible resources, end-of-life responsibility, technology development. We also have economic indicators mapped out here in terms of capital costs, operational and maintenance costs, revenue. All together, we have categorized the indicators coming from the life cycle sustainability assessment into capitals. These capitals refer to the impact that a particular pathway, waste valorization pathway that you could pick to convert it and use it for a different reason or a different purpose to generate value, which one is having the least environmental, social, and economic impacts is the one that we would recommend our clients to pick, right? So I'll give you an example of what kind of projects you could do with this. So there's this idea called of an industrial symbiosis. An industrial symbiosis is a group of businesses where one industry's waste is another industry's raw material. This is the plant in Chicago. It was basically a meat packing building that was basically, it was almost condemned. There was nobody who was utilizing it. And then they realized that we could retrofit this building and put in a bunch of food related startups. So you had companies that were producing mushrooms, saffron, vegetables. There was, of course, the coffee company. You can't not have a coffee company around a startup, right? Then there's brewery. There was a bakery, and so there were a lot of different types of waste being produced. So the question was, how can we convert waste generated into fuel options? And since currently wood was being used, and it was being brought into the bakery to create the fuel options for baking the breads, etc. So they had five options that they wanted to pursue. The first one was, of course, the business as usual, where the wood was coming in. Then we created a scenario on biobricks, where the coffee chaff and the spent grain could be pressed together to create biobricks. There was also the option of including the anaerobic digester. Then there was an optimization of the biobrick as well as the biogas that we had explored to make sure that we are taking into account all the factors. We were able to then quantify the different impacts for each of the scenarios and very quickly come to the conclusion that the anaerobic digester was the best solution. What I'm trying to show you here is that there are a lot of indicators while we're deciding on whether it is a sustainable circular solution or not. And in this case, it was good that we did the life cycle sustainability assessment, because if we would have just done the life cycle assessment, we would have found that the biobrick scenario was better. But that is not true when we take into account the social factors as well. Finally, I would like to end with a discussion on food systems, and I wanted to say that you will find that food, especially with the food service sector, there are a lot of different categories or indicators that you care about. When you have multiple KPIs, how do you make decisions, right? So that by accounting for the trade-offs between the different impacts. So say, for example, we want to be minimizing energy, we want to be minimizing water, we want to limit and treat food waste, and we also want to mitigate air and greenhouse gas emissions. All of these indicators or our objectives can have trade-offs on each other's, which means that if you add a new technology, you might be solving the issue for energy requirements, you might be reducing the energy requirements, but suddenly your the air emissions in terms of the emissions from cooking go up because the exhaust is not good enough, right? So there are trade-offs that one needs to take into account. So we've developed the food waste, energy, water emissions nexus framework that we apply to businesses in the restaurant and the food hospitality sector. We've done this analysis for a meal in a Landmark Oriental. They wanted to look at the impacts associated with fresh pasta being prepared with fresh truffles. And so we did an analysis that focused on both the indirect as well as the direct effects, which basically means that indirect effects are all of the effects that occur outside of the kitchen, right? So that's upstream procurement related impact. So where you're getting your pasta, the wheat for your pasta, how you're flying your truffles in to Hong Kong, all of that goes into the indirect effects. And within the direct effects or direct impacts are those that occur within the kitchen while during the food preparation stage. So that's how we are able to look at both the procurement decisions as well as operational management decisions. How can we further optimize them to become more sustainable by providing these various indicators that help stakeholders make decisions that allow them to be more sustainable moving forward. So ultimately, we have all of this information that we can get from life cycle assessments. It's all in the supply chains, right? We by taking a life cycle perspective, we're taking a complete perspective. And in this case, when we're thinking about ESG, that is missing. Life cycle assessment or life cycle implications on environmental, social, or governance is mostly missing, which basically means that we don't really know the true impact, as well as we are completely unaware of the risks that that emanate or emerge from the supply chain itself. And so there is a great need to integrate SDG life cycle thinking into ESG in order to reach the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals. If we have to align ESG with SDG, the life cycle approach is essential. And so finally, I'd like to conclude by saying that life cycle approaches presented here compare different circular economy pathways to identify which is the most optimal solution for the local environment. And we also looked at the fact that we need to not just focus on the environmental impacts in the upstream and downstream of the products that we're developing or solutions that we're producing, but also look at not just the environmental impacts, but also socioeconomic factors. And finally, we spoke about in the context of food, energy, water, emissions nexus, when we have multiple impact categories or objectives to meet, how do we balance these trade-offs? One needs to do system-wide analysis as well. And if we have to eventually realize the value of ESG, it has to account life cycle impacts. So far, from a carbon perspective, scope 3 is definitely on the cards to be included, but what about the other factors? Are we going to be taking into account the life cycle related impacts in ESG? So that's how I would like to end my talk. I'm more than happy to answer questions. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you very much. I think that was really interesting and for sure something to think about when we create new solutions. So with your permission, perhaps some of those concepts would be great if we could add into the folder of resources for those teams that will continue in the hackathon competition so that they can revisit how to think about their solution in a broader sense. There's definitely lots to be learned, but I think that's also the purpose of this hackathon, to actually learn new things as we go and improve the solutions we are working on. So I would like to now open the floor for questions for the audience. And actually, we do have a question to ask to the audience through a poll. So I'll ask our team to launch the poll. It's more like testing you whether you have listened to the presentation, I guess, but it's also just to kind of see what do you know about circularity, or what do you know about the life cycle assessment? So then we kind of can get to understand whether we can offer you more resources and support in learning about these concepts so that you can have or develop the best solutions possible in this process. So we're asking about resource circularity, so you should see that on your screen. Please do choose your options. So even the panelists can, so the hosts and panelists cannot vote, so I can't do anything, but I hope that you see the questions right now. And I'll let our team to reveal the answers. as soon as possible. So the question is, what are the characteristics of circular economy? And I guess we have the answers. Right, so resource circularity, what is characteristic of a circular economy? Now, there are 4 options. So resources are mined, made into products, and then become waste. Second, maximum use is extracted from resources. Third, minimum waste is generated. Fourth, involves circular economy involves sharing, leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling. So the correct answer is, actually, this is a multiple choice, I believe. So there were actually 2 answers. First, the two correct answers that you could have chosen. So maximum use is extracted from resources. And the second is involves sharing, leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling. So I see that vast majority, 87% of people who took the poll has responded and chosen this option here. So I think we're on a good way. And I think a lot of you understand what circular economy really means. And then the second choice, maximum use is extracted from resources, 47% of you. So actually that was also the correct answer. So I'm sure that there is also some space for all of us to learn more about circular economy. And the second question was, have you heard of life cycle assessment before? So this was a single choice, obviously, just kind of to see how much you know about life cycle assessment. And I see it's kind of 60% of you don't know much about this assessment process. And some of you have heard about it. So I think that's good to know. So we can definitely include some more links to resources for you to understand a little bit better what life cycle assessment means, and even more what life cycle sustainability assessment means, as Dr. Chopra has mentioned. Great, thank you so much for participating in the poll. And I would like to welcome any sort of questions. Right, we have one question here that I'm gonna read out. Chandi Sacheti is asking, super informative presentation in the life cycle sustainability framework as opposed to viewing each of the 8 capitals independently. Is it possible to develop a framework or method of analysis to take into account the impact of the intersectionality and overlap between the capitals, for instance, social capital and human capital?
Well, absolutely. I think that's the aspect where you bring in your stakeholders, right? So you ask your stakeholders to value what do they actually care about, and then that helps you further clarify what sort of solutions or initiatives are going to help you achieve both of those types of say objectives, and in terms of the stakeholder value that you have collected from your from point of contacts in the organization. So that's how I would think about this.
Great, we've got another question from Macy. Where can we start to do the life cycle sustainable assessment for hospitality industry?
I mean, I think you could start with wherever you have, wherever you feel that you have a lot of different contradictory information coming out, right? So the good example is always with anything that is an easy answer to the problem, because they're always incorrect, especially in sustainability, right? So if you think that we're going to use a bamboo-based cup, and that's going to solve all of our problems, and that's going to be the circular economy solution, well, I guess in that case you should definitely check, because anything that is coming out of intuition is probably going to be misleading.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? I don't see any more questions right now, but if there are any more questions, we're going to revisit that at the end of the session anyways. So I would like to thank you, Shauhrat, for your presentation for now, and hope you can stay with us for a little more. And then at the end of the session, we will have a little discussion as well. All right, thank you so much. And we will move on to our next speaker. Sonalie Figueiras, who will speak about sustainable packaging. So as I mentioned before, Sonalie is the founder and CEO of Brinc and Eco Warehouse and sourcegreenpackaging.com. So she has a lot of understanding and understands the trends and nuances in the sustainable packaging landscape. And since one of the categories that we have here is on packaging at our hackathon, we can learn from her observations as an entrepreneur and a specialist in this area. So while our team sets up Sonalie as a speaker, we also have a little poll for you again to kind of see how much do you know about plastic. So obviously the sustainable packaging topic is here because we use a lot of takeaway products, or we do a lot of takeaway in the hospitality industry in particular. So we use plastic for that. And so the plastic is quite a big issue. So the question that we are asking you on the packaging is, on average, how many pieces of plastic are being used in each product? I guess we will give a few minutes to you to answer the question. And whenever ready, we will have the answer. So the possibilities you had was to choose from 1.5, 2, 2.5, or 4. And the right answer is actually 2.5. So majority of you actually got that right. So that's great. But I think Sonalie will have much more insights for you than just like a simplistic question like this when you have a multiple choice. I think there is much more interesting things that we should know about plastic and sustainable packaging, for that matter, that you can learn from. All right, so before Sonalie will take the stage, I would like to make a little introduction of her. I've already mentioned all of her background work that she's doing, and she's really a woman of many, wearing many hats and being in many different spaces. Besides the packaging and eco products, she's also very passionate about alternative protein. So, follow her for sure if you like to hear about news and trends. She definitely shares a lot of interesting content on LinkedIn and also on her media platform, Green Media. So Sonalie, as I mentioned, is a founder and editor-in-chief of Green Queen. It's an award-winning impact media platform advocating for social and environmental change through inspiring and empowering original content, and one of the world's leading outlets for alternative protein news. So definitely subscribe to their newsletter. You'll get fresh news into your mailbox shortly. She's also founder and CEO of Eco Warehouse, the global sourcing platform for certified organic products, and the co-founder and CEO of sourcegreenpackaging.com, the world's first global marketplace for sustainable packaging with a mission to fight single-use plastic waste. With over a decade of experience in publishing digital media, marketing, organic trade and sustainability, as well as alternative protein and green packaging, she's an eco-wellness industry veteran with a keen eye for market trends and sought-after international speaker and moderator. She has shared her expertise on stages across Asia and beyond, including Harvard Business School and 2 times at TEDx. So I would like to welcome Sonalie to talk to you a little bit more about what she does at these different ventures that she has, but most importantly on sustainable packaging. Sonalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lucia, and thank you so much to Green Hospitality. Good evening from Hong Kong. I'm really excited to talk to you about sustainable packaging because I do a lot of speaking lately on alternative protein, but of course I'm also very involved in the rethinking of materials and also kind of disrupting the way that we view waste. So if my presentation is ready to start, should I just share it myself? Or are you putting it up? I wasn't sure.
You can share, Sonalie.
Okay. Myself? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. Let me get that going then. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, I'm not going to cut corners. Plastic is an absolute disaster. And one of the things that we're doing at Source Green Packaging is we're really going to make a big bet on a world without plastic. So one of the first things we're going to be doing as we continue to grow is go on a real education mission about plastic, because unfortunately, plastic is just full of misunderstandings. And most people think they understand plastic, but they don't. Unfortunately, there is this myth that plastic can be circular, and that's absolutely not true. Plastic is a linear material. It is made from fossil fuels that are extracted, that are non-renewable, and recycling, which is often touted as an answer to creating a circular plastic loop, is absolutely not a solution. And I'll go into it more later, but essentially this idea that you can recycle plastic and that therefore it makes it circular is just not true. Because when you recycle plastic, first of all, you need to use energy. Plastic is a toxic material. It creates toxins while you're making plastic. Okay, so their production process has toxins associated with it. And same with recycling. When you recycle plastic, you emit toxic gases into the air. Not to mention that there are byproducts of recycling, just like there are byproducts of making plastic that are also toxic and polluting. So recycling plastic and this kind of bet that we're all making in the world, where we're going to say, okay, we're going to solve packaging by using recycled plastics and by focusing on better recycling, is just nonsense. The other thing to understand is we've been recycling for decades now, and the amount of recycling that we do of plastics is just shameful. There's another slide that I'll show you with what happens to plastic, but essentially it's below 15% globally. So most of the plastic that you've used in the world is still in the earth. And here's what's happening. Oil companies are realizing that they can no longer be oil companies because we're having a massive green energy shift. So oil companies have to find new ways and reasons to exist. And what are they doing? They're becoming plastic companies. And in fact, you might be shocked to learn that carbon footprint, the concept of carbon footprint, was invented by oil companies, as was recycling. Because of course, they've made us dependent on this drug, plastic, which, it must be said, is a very useful material. There's no doubt about that. But they've made us dependent on this useful material made from toxic fossil fuels that are non-renewable and extractive. And then they've convinced us that if we recycle it, everything's going to be fine. But of course, every time you recycle plastic, you actually lose some of its value and you lose some of its performance quality. So you're not able to recycle plastic forever. So it's not like a glass or an aluminum. So that's one thing that you really must keep in mind when you're thinking about what material to choose and why using plastic, especially single-use plastics, is such a disaster. But as such, oil companies have a plan to start really moving towards plastic instead of energy. And on the current path, plastic production will triple by 2050. The other problem with plastic is that it's a huge source of waste and pollution. There is plastic in everything. There are microplastics in your blood. There are microplastics in babies' fetuses. There are plastics in our rivers. There are plastics in our oceans. Wildlife across the ocean are swallowing microplastics, and very unfortunately, microplastics, which are tiny, tiny microscopic pieces of plastic that result from the degradation of plastic in the ocean and in rivers and in our waterways. Those tiny little pieces of plastics they can never really be recovered. While we are able to do some work to remove some large pieces of plastic from our oceans and waterways, we're not able to remove microplastics because they're so small. Microplastics are also in our soil. And that is going into the food that we grow and interfering with the quality of the food that we grow, because obviously we're not really meant to eat food grown in soil that has plastic. But on the screen in front of you, what you will see is hopefully some pretty shocking numbers about what happens to plastic today. So you buy a plastic bottle, and on the plastic bottle, it will tell you, oh, I'm a PET bottle, recycle me. And you will then think, I can recycle. So, you know, pat on our shoulders, we've done what we need to do. Except that that is just this big lie that oil companies and other organizations have convinced us, when actually, and this is the optimistic number, 15% of plastic waste today is recycled. The rest ends up in mismanaged dumps or leaks, some of which are illegal, some of which are not illegal. Across Asia, we have mismanaged dumps that are just a result of lacking waste, municipal waste infrastructure. 25% of plastic waste is burned. And let me just tell you that incineration and burning causes air pollution, toxic gases to be released. It's so bad. Anyone who lives near incinerators demonstrates higher risks of things like lung cancer and other cancers. So it's not good for us. And then 40% of plastics waste ends up in landfill. And of course, it's not degrading if it ends up in landfill, because plastics really don't degrade. And the other thing that is a bit of a misunderstanding is all these different types of plastic. So PET versus PE versus PVC. Most of those plastics do not have value in the recycling chain. And not only that, we just don't have systems to recycle them. So even here in Hong Kong, we have these fantastic green community centers that have popped up to help us recycle better. But for example, they will not take certain types of plastic like PVC. There is no way to recycle PVC in Hong Kong, so that's going to the landfill. The other thing that's happening is that some of the plastic that you think you're recycling by putting it in the bin, it is not ending up in a recycling center. It's actually ending up in landfill or in a mismanaged dump. So you may actually be doing your best and actually taking that time to sort, but it's just not happening. And so the result is that we really need to turn off the plastic tap. We really need to quit plastic. We desperately need to go on a massive plastic diet, and we need to, stop extracting fossil fuels to make a material that we then use for an average of 5 minutes sometimes, and then discard it. I also want to talk a little bit about paper packaging, because what I've noticed is that a lot of people, they think, okay, well, plastic is bad, so let's do paper. But here's a fun fact. 3 billion trees are cut every year in order to make shipping boxes for our e-commerce orders and so on. That is 1/5 of all the trees that are cut down each year. Now, I hope I don't need to tell anyone in this audience that we're losing trees at an alarming rate, which is having a direct consequence on our ability to fight climate change, and that we actually need more trees. And so how ironic is it that we would go onto a website and that we would buy a product and we would think, oh, it's going to get shipped in a paper box, which is good. And I'm at the end of my purchase, I'm going to do something like add on I'm going to replant a tree. But meanwhile, a tree was used to make our box, right? By 2025, the demand for paper packaging is going to grow by 20%. And very honestly, that's a conservative estimate. If we keep shopping at the rate that we do, especially with the rise of online shopping, which requires more shipping boxes, because instead of us going to a store and carrying our goods home, we need them to be sent to us from, across the world, that number is actually probably going to be larger. 26% of all landfill waste is paper. And because it often is mixed with things like toxic inks or liners, plastic liners, or it's mixed with food waste or what have you, it actually doesn't break down cleanly. Obviously, simple paper can break down, but it has to have conditions that are, open air, and most landfills are just toxic dumps because they're mixed full of so many different things. So it's not great that the paper is ending up in the landfill. And again, we're cutting down trees for something that we need for a very short amount of time to then end up in the landfill. It's not ideal. So we need to change packaging. And as I have been talking about, online shopping is booming, and that's going to mean a crazy amount more packaging. And we've already seen that. And one of the reasons that myself and my co-founder, Luke, we launched Source Green Packaging is because we saw that during the pandemic, the entire world stopped going out and became addicted to shopping online and also ordering food online and getting everything online. And some of those behaviors have just stayed on as we've gotten more addicted to convenience and frankly, a little bit more lazy. And so this is just a trend that is going upwards. The other issue in packaging is we have a global plastic waste crisis and just generally a waste crisis. Our landfills are full all over the world. Our oceans are just mired in horrible amounts of plastic and other waste and pollution. And incineration is, as I said, really not ideal. While there are a few countries in Europe that manage their incineration as best as they can, it is still requires burning materials that emit toxic gases. And those toxic gases have to go somewhere. So what's happening is these things called EPR regulations are coming in. What's an EPR regulation? It stands for Extended Producer Responsibility. And what that means is that governments and laws are now saying, hey, if you make a product, you're actually responsible for the whole life cycle of that product, including the production of it and the raw materials of how they got made, but also what happens at the end of that product. And that includes the packaging. And in certain places like Europe and the UK, there are regulations that are making it harder and harder to have bad single-use plastic packaging because there's actual penalties and bans. And in the US, we're seeing in certain states like Oregon and Maine, they already have EPR regulations coming in, and we believe that EPR is going to get more and more strict across the world. Even in Asia, there's signs that some are starting. And so we can imagine a world in 10, 20 years where manufacturers, brands, producers will be responsible for their waste. And you will have to pay to put things in landfill. You will be responsible for any pollution you cause, any toxic leaks that you cause. And so brands are needing and companies are needing to rethink their packaging. And while it's going to take a few years, it's better to start thinking about that now. And the other thing that is just, I've never seen anything like it. And I've been in sustainability for over 10 years in multiple verticals. I've never seen as much greenwashing as I have seen in the packaging and material space. And I continue to see it every day on LinkedIn, on social feeds, in the media. The amount of misunderstanding, but sometimes also misleading that is happening is terrible. And we are seeing greenwashing laws that are coming in. In the UK on April 1st, the UK Green Claims Guide came on board. And basically you're gonna get in trouble now. And they're especially targeting fashion brands, but also F&B brands. So that involves hospitality. And we're definitely seeing that brands are going to start to get financially and legally penalized for making statements that are not backed up by evidence or making statements that are misleading. In France, we've already had court cases happen where brands like Adidas have actually gotten in trouble for example, saying that their shoes were made with recycled plastic, making the consumer think that it was entirely recycled plastic when it was actually less than 50% of the material that came from recycled plastic. So it's going to get harder and harder to advertise and make claims. Similar to what happened 15 to 20 years ago with the food world, where we started talking about organic and people started making claims without backing. And so then what happened is organic became regulated. And now you can't really in most countries use the word organic without having an actual certificate. that is backed by a standard, that is backed by a law. So we think that is going to happen more and more across the world for packaging and materials. But one of the biggest trends that it's important to have in mind, and hopefully many of you are in the audience today, is that Gen Z wants green options. And we're seeing some really encouraging numbers where 81% of shoppers are saying that companies are using excessive packaging for shipping, and 57% would pay extra for eco-friendly packaging. And in the US, 60% of Americans, including Americans of all ages, say that they want brands with sustainable packaging. So packaging is increasingly becoming part of the conversation. And increasingly what we're seeing is if you're a conscious brand and everything inside your packaging has been sourced with great care, it's very difficult for you to justify your values if your packaging is not also sourced with the planet in mind. So what does future packaging look like? And that's what we really focus on at Source Green Packaging. So we work with a selection of suppliers that are extremely innovative and that are truly looking to a circular model where the idea, and in our perfect world, all packaging would be renewable and non-extractive and ideally made from waste and tree-free. So we don't believe that we should be cutting down trees to make packaging, especially when we're in the middle of a climate emergency where trees help to fight rising CO2 emissions. We believe that there are huge amounts of potential from what we call side stream valorization, which is using waste that is part of other industries and using them to make packaging. So there's agriculture waste, there's things like beer waste, food waste, textile waste. There's all kinds of different waste that is currently also ending up going into either getting dumped into the ocean or in landfill that we could be using to make packaging, which once again, packaging is something that we use to protect a product temporarily. So we really need to think about the materials that we're using for something that is temporary. We also focus on non-toxic, so no fossil fuels, but also no things like forever chemicals. One type of forever chemicals is PFAS. I won't bother pronouncing the word, but it's polyfluor. In fact, I'm not very good at pronouncing it, but it's basically these substances that are extremely toxic and that are used as coatings on products, especially food packaging. So PFAS is actually used in many compostable packaging materials. So a lot of hotels, for example, and restaurants would have switched to compostable packaging. But the problem with compostable packaging is that a lot of it is made from bagasse, which is great. It's a waste stream from the sugar processing industry. So far, so good, tree-free, no fossil fuels, except that for our food containers, we need to make them heat-proof and grease-proof and oil-proof, right? And slightly waterproof. And so we add a coating to them. And those coatings have PFAs in them, or PFAS, depending on where you're from and how you pronounce it. And these are very, very dangerous substances that are linked to cancer, lower fertility, digestive issues, and a whole host of other medical issues. One thing that may remind you of this is another forever chemical, which is PFOA, which is the coating that we use on non-stick pans when we cook, and which about 10 years ago, there was a huge campaign about how dangerous those coatings were. So it's similar, and we have similar types of coatings in packaging. So we offer at Source Green Packaging suppliers that have solutions that are alternatives to these forever chemicals and that have coatings that are made from non-toxic solutions. We really focus on 100% bio-based because a lot of what we see now, and this is going back to the greenwashing, is packaging that is partly bio-based. So you might think you're getting something, bio-based, but if it doesn't say 100% bio-based, then chances are it's mixed with a fossil fuel. In which case, we're still back at a form of synthetic polymers that we're trying to avoid. We also focus on solutions that are degradable in natural conditions, We don't use the word biodegradable because it is very misleading and does not have a proper framework behind it that is universal. But the idea is that the material is able to degrade in open air, non-lab conditions. So if it's really not, it's misleading to consumers if they're buying a product and paying more for the packaging and being told that it is biodegradable, but then it turns out it's only biodegradable in a lab at certain temperatures and only if it's brought to that type of lab, of which many countries don't have infrastructure for. So that's also misleading. So there's a lot of misleading even in the green packaging solutions. We like to use the term bio-contributing because there are actually now innovations in sustainable packaging materials that can actually give back to the soil or do things like help make food compost faster. And there are some really exciting developments there. A lot of this innovation is very early stage, but we think that in 2 to 3 years, the market will really offer so many more solutions. So we definitely know that we're early in the journey, but we really want to focus on educating and engaging people on this plastic-free world that we really see in the next 10 to 15 years. We also focus on certified home compostable. So this goes back to the degradable point. Certified home compostable means that it has been vetted by a third party, and it means that it is compostable in a home compost food pile or a backyard compost. So once again, there's a big difference between home compostable and industrial compostable. And a lot of bioplastics are only industrial compostable, and so they require special conditions in order to be composted. And for example, here in Hong Kong, we don't really have a proper industrial compostable infrastructure. So it is, again, those things are ending up in landfill or they are contaminating plastic recycling streams, which is not good also. But of course, another option that we look at and we help our buyers find solutions in this space is reusable and refillable. And hopefully you've been seeing headlines about so many interesting campaigns and pilot programs to really pioneer reusable and refillable packaging. And we're really excited about how many cities now have some of these programs, and there's even many investors that are putting money in these solutions, and it's really fighting the kind of convenience obsession that we have. I think we have a long way to go, and reusable and refillable is complicated and requires a lot of logistical solving, and it's also very localized, right? Because if you're having like a reusable coffee cup system, that's got to be very specific to the city or the town that it is working in. It is not something that can easily be scaled everywhere. You have to work with local community infrastructures, which is a good thing, which is a really good thing, but it's also more complicated and it's harder to justify in our capitalist world where it's all about, scaling and getting billions of users. Refillable systems require a different mindset, but we do see more and more impact investors and founders and governments that are really looking to support these efforts because they realize that they need to deal with plastic waste. And of course, if we priced waste and we made people pay for their waste, then all of these solutions would suddenly seem a lot cheaper and more accessible. So the hope is that regulation will really push companies and governments to rethink about how they approach waste. Because right now it's basically like unlimited waste, throw it in the ocean or the landfill or burn it, none of which is good for any of us. But of course, and it's not on the slide, the best packaging is no packaging. And so we have this kind of, have this journey where we say to our clients, can you start with no packaging first? And then can you go to reusable and refillable? And then if really you do need some packaging, then let's look at it being non-toxic and 100% bio-based and degradable in natural conditions, etc. These are some of the exciting things happening in packaging in terms of materials. There's now packaging from milk. There's packaging from upcycled beer waste, from chitin. Chitin is a substance, is a polymer that you get from three different areas. One is crustacean waste. So every time you eat shrimps and prawns, there's a huge amount of waste generated from the shells. And currently, seafood companies are paying a lot of money to dispose of that waste, but that waste can be used to create things like alternatives to styrofoam. Actually, there's a really cool company called Cruise Foam that just got invested in by Leonardo DiCaprio. And they're one of our supplier partners, and they are working with chitin to make alternatives for styrofoam so that they can help, for example, electronic companies have packaging for their electronics, because obviously electronics need to be packaged. They need to have corner packaging, right? So that they stay safe and that they don't move in the box. And they're using chitin to do that. You can also get chitin from insects, and you can get chitin from fungi. And so there's a lot of potential for that. There's also amazing innovation happening from ag waste. So I've told you about the gas, which is sugarcane waste, but there's also hemp herds, waste wool, which is used for insulation. There's coconut husks, which are used along with beer waste to make films. There's also bamboo. There's starches. So you probably know about cornstarch being used to make bioplastics. Some can be home compostable, others not. There's really exciting stuff happening with algae, lots of seaweed films and seaweed coatings, and cellulose, of course, which is derived from wood waste, but from trees. But the idea is to get it from waste sources that are byproducts of other industries like the construction industry, and take materials that are just not being used right now. I mentioned mycelium for chitin. I mentioned fungi, but mycelium are the roots of a certain type of fungi. And it can be used also like chitin to make foam that can be used in beauty brands and in furniture packaging, again, as a replacement for polystyrene, or what we call in the industry EPS, which is one of the worst types of plastic because it is basically unrecyclable. And here in Hong Kong, it's really sad. We have polystyrene waste everywhere because we have a very, very active seafood community and industry, and all our fish is stored in these polystyrene boxes that end up in our ocean. And polystyrene is made up of tiny, tiny little bubbles that then disintegrate in the ocean and then contaminate the ocean and can't really be cleaned up. And if you've ever opened a box and had a piece of polystyrene in it and touched it and then it fell apart, and then you had to spend hours vacuuming or sweeping up the waste of those little balls, you know how easy it is for polystyrene to just cause so much pollution and mess, and how difficult it is to clean it up. So you can imagine in the ocean or in soil, it's impossible. There's also other things happening like fermentation-based bioplastics, and there's going to be a lot of biotech innovation in materials, again, using things that are made from waste ideally, or from other side stream valorizations. But the point is, there's so much going on, so many smart and clever folks are getting into this space because so many people have just had enough with the plastic waste crisis and the fact that we just have not solved it. So there's a lot to be excited about, but it's really important for everybody to start thinking, all right, I need to get on my plastic diet. And the good news is that we are working on the world's first plastic waste impact tool to help companies go on that plastic diet. So stay tuned for that. If you have questions, you can contact me at hello@sourcegreenpackaging.com, or you can go on our marketplace. But that's really it from me. And I see some questions.
Great, thank you, Sonalie. That was great. I'm sure we can share perhaps how do you see the future of packaging, so that the participants in the challenge can really think about it when they create their solutions. Those who are interested in thinking about new alternative packagings. We are running a little bit out of time, but the participants can pose the questions in the Q&A boxes, and then Sonalie can actually type the answers for you guys. Sure. So if you have any questions, please do so in the chat. well, in the Q&A box that you have on your screen. So when you type a question, Sonalie will see it and actually can answer to you directly. So don't be shy, please. And also she has extended the invitation to you to contact her directly if you had more questions, or check out the Green Source packaging for more inspiration as to what is possible. And hopefully you can come up with something that is not yet on the marketplace that could be a new solution. Thank you, Sonalie, so much for your presentation. It was super insightful. Thanks so much. And I'm going to move on to our next speaker while Sonalie will be answering questions that you guys type into the Q&A. So our next up and our next challenge at the hackathon is food technology. So I would like to welcome Natalie Leung, who is a program manager of food and technology accelerated programs at Brinc Hong Kong. And while the team is setting up Natalie here for her talk, I will introduce Natalie a little bit, and a little bit also a few words about Brinc, which is a global venture capital and accelerator firm that empowers entrepreneurs to help solve some of the world's biggest challenges. In her role, Natalie invests in and supports startups that are using technology to make the food system more sustainable and efficient. Through the program, Brinc has made 40+ investments in the food tech space, encompassing alternative proteins, novel ingredients, functional foods, food supply chain optimization, and logistics. And prior to her current role, Natalie was previously working in the financial industry, in venture capital and investment banking. And she also holds a Bachelor of Arts from Georgetown University in Washington, DC. Now I'd like to get Natalie to share her screen and share a little bit more about the food technology that she is an expert on. Over to you, Natalie. I think we might have lost Natalie for a moment. Let's see. And while we're waiting for Natalie to reconnect, seems like there was some issue with her connection. Feel free to please write down your questions for Sonalie that has shared about sustainable packaging. So anything you're curious about with regards to sustainable packaging. I see Macy has a question. So I'll let that go through while we wait for Natalie to reconnect. Sorry about the little issue. So Macy is asking about EPR regulations or mentioning EPR regulations. And she's curious, as a customer, we may not be able to choose currently, where can we find the new packaging materials around the world? And any new packaging materials are available in Hong Kong. So I believe Sonalie's marketplace would be such place where you could find these alternatives. And Sonalie is answering the question, so feel free to check out the Q&A section. And I think we might okay. So I would suggest for our team that we will go to next presentation instead, because we are unsure how quickly Natalie is going to be able to come back on. So let's make the little change, and we will come back to Natalie later and go to Angus. Angus, hopefully you don't mind that we're going to move you forward. And while the team is going to set you up, so we will, instead of food technology, we're going to speak about the textile innovation first, and then we will go back to the food technology later. So let me introduce Angus as the next speaker. Angus is responsible for research and investment at the Mills Fabrica. And a little bit about Angus. He's actually researching areas in enhancing understanding and learnings in the textile space at the Mills Fabrica. He's also passionate about the discovery of insights and generally about research. So I hope that he's gonna share with you a little bit what he found out through his endeavors. He researches on many different consumer verticals. So not only this one that you're gonna hear about today, But because we have a challenge on textile innovation, that's why we chose this particular topic. And that's also one of the expertise at the Mills Fabrica, where they work with different materials on textile innovation, innovating in this old former actually textile factory. So prior to joining the Mills Fabrica, Angus was an industry analyst at Coresight Research, focusing on e-commerce and new retail development. He obtained a bachelor from the City University of Hong Kong. So almost colleague of Shauhrat. Okay, Angus, when you're ready, you can share your screen and I'll pass you the word.
Yeah, thank you, Lucia, and thank you, Green Hospitality team. Good evening, everyone. This is Angus from the Mills Fabrica. Today, I'm very happy to continue to talk about the topic of circularity, but in the space of textiles and apparel. So to begin with, the current production model, as we know, is a linear one, which is usually what we call the take, make, dispose model. So over the past decade, clothing production has almost doubled. But indeed, the average number of times clothing is being worn before disposal has decreased by 36%. And what is worse still, less than 1% of material used to produce clothing is being recycled into new clothing. So if we continue to maintain the current pace of production by now, there will be a serious environmental impacts, including things like microplastic problems, as most of the clothing that we are wearing today are made from polyester, which is derived from the fossil fuels. So therefore, many are calling for a transition to the circular economy lately, which is a regenerative system. In a circular model, we prefer renewable energy and resources over fossil fuel. And when the materials eventually have to go back to the nature, they have to be safe to the environment and biodegradable, rather than being harmful to our natural ecosystem. So in the apparel value chain, we are seeing market trends towards what we call the 4 Rs across the whole value chain. First, we have replace, and we mean to replace the fossil fuel-based resources with alternative bio-based materials. And then we also have reduce. How can we, during the production process, try to minimize waste and chemical pollutants, if possible? And at the consumption stage, we have reuse, as seen by the secondhand marketplaces that are popping up lately. And of course, we couldn't forget the post-consumer, which is the end-of-life solutions that we can think about the recycling solutions. And we have seen in recent years, there are many partnerships between these young innovators or young startups working in each of these areas with different companies. And in the following slides, I'm going to give the case study of each of them. So for the first one is about replace. At the raw material level, there's a young startup called Genomatica. It is trying to replace nylon with plant-based materials. And it is currently also working with Lululemon in order to incorporate this plant-based material into its fabric supply chain. This is because the production of nylon indeed emits a lot of greenhouse gases and consumes a lot of water. And the industry is trying to looking for alternative materials to resolve it. And moving to the production stage, the conventional dyeing processes for textiles or apparel actually contains polluting petrochemicals and toxic chemicals. In view of this, we know that there's a startup that is based in the UK called Colorifix. It is making use of biotechnology, advances in biology, to try to create dyes that come with zero harmful chemicals, and also with much less water and energy being consumed. This is also due to the consequences of the fossil fuel-based economy that we currently have a heavy emphasis and reliance on. And with these biotechnologies to produce dyes in a new way, innovators are partnering with existing brands such as Pangaea in this case, to try to remove the use of synthetic dyes. And when we move to the consumption stage, we see that indeed recently there are more second-hand marketplace in the market. And however, the counterfeits are still a problem for these second-hand marketplaces, especially for luxury goods and luxury brands. But there are also solutions to help enhance the confidence about buying products from these second-hand platforms. So we know there's also a company based in the UK, also a startup called Reflaunt. It is using its technology platforms to try to enable a counterfeit-free second-hand platforms to help provide these services to fashion brands. And with this kind of second-hand marketplaces, consumers are able to give their clothing a second life rather than directly send them the clothing to landfills. And this is what we also see in the consumption stage, that how this kind of second-hand marketplace can help reduce waste in one angle. And finally, last but not the least, we have to consider the end-of-life solutions. And one important thing that can be provided here is the recycling technology. For example, we know there's a company in Sweden called RenewCell. It is making use of a chemical recycling method that is able to produce recycled cotton outputs that has almost the same quality of virgin fibers. This is a great advance in as previously the cotton materials has always been recycled, but in a mechanical way. When we are doing it in a mechanical way, the outputs, the quality of the outputs is indeed less valuable for economic use, such as turning them into new clothes again. Maybe perhaps most of the time those mechanically recycled outputs will be used for lower economic value products such as carpets. So RenewCell is trying to produce this kind of recycled materials in a quality way, to try to provide recycled materials for the use of major fashion brands that we see in the market. And as we also notice, many fashion brands right now have announced their own timeline to become circular, and therefore they have been considering these different kind of solutions that we see. But of course, apart from stating so many examples in other parts of the world, indeed we notice that the circularity concepts is developing here in Hong Kong. For example, here at the Mills, we have a garment-to-garment recycle retail store, which the consumers can indeed bring their old clothing to the retail store and wait for a while to get when the old clothing has been turned to new fiber, they can then use the new fiber to produce new clothing items. So this is education concept there is an education element there for this retail store, and is what we call the G2G store here at the Mills. And indeed, on an industrial level, we have cotton recycling factory here in Taipo as well, run by Novotest, that are able to take a larger volume of clothing to recycle cotton clothing for us. And we see that the circularity concept is beginning to gain more traction here in Hong Kong, and we surely want to see more of such kind of projects to happen in the future. So this is the end of my sharing. I hope that this brief sharing will be helpful for you guys to think about your circular projects in the future. Thank you, and happy to take any questions from the audience.
Great, thank you, Angus. So that was a good snapshot of the textile innovation. Surely in the hospitality industry, we have a volume of different textiles, maybe not the same as in fashion, but actually maybe even more interesting because we can get similar quality of textile that could be repurposed later from like the linens that are used in hotel rooms. They have a specific life cycle or how long they're being actually used by different properties. We recently held a think tank that you were part of as well on textile innovation and ideas and roadblocks for the textile innovation in the hospitality industry. So for those of you who are interested in this particular challenge, I also recommend you to take a look on the outcomes of that think tank, where the different experts and the industry leaders have talked about their challenges and solutions that could be possible. If we have any questions from the audience, I'd like to welcome them now. We have a couple of minutes before we go into our last presentation. I don't see any questions right now. But I see some in our chat actually instead of questions. So I'll ask from the chat. Since Jessica Lee is asking, since there are already a lot of secondhand, I believe, stores already, what can those stores improve on? So if we were thinking about textile, we already have secondhand shops, how they can be better, in your opinion, Angus?
Yeah, actually, indeed, I think it's not just for secondhand stores, but also for those secondhand marketplace. Actually, they are running a e-commerce model, right? And we know that that involves a lot of logistics, transportation as well. Although in one hand, it does help reduce some of the products being sent to landfills directly, but we also have to consider, do we create any new problems during the process during the transportation or logistics stages? So like Professor said earlier, it's very important for us all to look at the life cycle assessment, to think about the impact, to measure it from head to toe, to understand where we have improved or where we might have created new problems instead. I believe that when we have more understanding about the concepts and more companies and more organizations are using the life cycle assessment to look at the impacts, we will have a better consensus or idea about how we should better reduce our impacts in a way that is environmentally friendly, but at the same time can preserve the economic value. I guess that's the beauty of the word sustainability, because we should have to strike a balance between the two.
Yes, indeed, and also like we're pushing our boundaries, right? Because like we are kind of stretching our imagination and creativity, because it's not easy. We all have seen in this presentation that there are some traits of, and you know how that works. Really, sometimes we think something is more sustainable, but in reality, we might be creating another problem. How do we even assess which problem is bigger? Because we probably cannot have a completely perfect solution. I think sustainability is really about trying to be better, but maybe not perfect. And I see two actually questions here for you, Angus. So let's answer them. Did the adoption of this technology that you mentioned add to the cost of the final garment? What is your observation?
Yeah, so the major economic problems would be that right now, most of the materials are fossil fuel resource derived, like polyester, nylon, actually for those virgin plastic materials, they are really cheap in the market. Whether it's for recycled materials or bio-based materials, we still need more adoption of this kind of materials in order to help bring the cost down. It's always like a chicken and egg question, because when there are not enough companies adopting it, then it's quite hard for us to achieve the so-called economies of scale in order to help bring these things down. Because I believe that when plastics first comes to the world, perhaps after the Second World War, it is also a new material, and its causes it's actually not friendly, was not friendly at that time, but people soon realize its practicality, and many people then adopt it, and it enables the cost to be spread across the values, across different stakeholders in the industry. So I guess the most useful way is to increase the awareness of the society towards these materials, so that when more people know about it, then we can have try to boost the adoption of those materials in a gradual way with trial and error.
Thank you. And then there's one more question that we're going to answer before we move on to our last presentation. Lai Sui Fong is asking, is garment-to-garment recycling operated in industrial scale anywhere in the world right now?
Yes, so the previous example, Renewcell, is actually operating plants in Sweden. They are taking clothing from the mainstream fashion brands, and they are working on these garment-to-garment recycling for especially cotton and cellulosic type of materials. It is in Sweden, and also in Hong Kong, like mentioned earlier, we also have the factory run by Novo Test in Taipo.
Great, fantastic, Angus. Thank you so much for your insights. We're going to move on to the next speaker. And those of you who have more questions, feel free to write it out in the Q&A section. Angus can be still answering those questions in the Q&A session. So if you pose a question and it's directed at Angus, make it obvious so that he can respond to you later. And now we're going to move on to our last speaker. So Natalie, who I'm already introduced. So reintroducing just quickly to refresh your memory, but the last presentation will be on our last challenge in the innovation, in our innovation challenge, in our hackathon, which is food technology. So as I mentioned before, Natalie is a program manager for technology accelerator programs at Brinc Hong Kong, which is a accelerator firm that empowers entrepreneurs to help solve some of the world's biggest problems. So they have other verticals, not only food technology, but Natalie is an expert on this aspect, and she's going to talk about different things that are happening in the innovative ecosystem and what the problem with the food really is and how we can bring about some interesting innovations about. So Natalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Sorry about earlier, my internet dropped, but let me share my screen. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah, we can see it.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for having me. My name is Natalie, and as Lucia mentioned, I manage the Food Tech Accelerator Program at Brinc, which is a global venture accelerator. But before I tell you more about the company or what we do, I want to first focus on the problem of our broken food system, some of the existing solutions we have to address this problem, and why doing so is so important. So let's first jump in by discussing one of the key questions that really drives our work, which is the question of how we can feed nearly 10 billion people by 2050 in a sustainable manner. Bearing in mind that this will comprise of people who on average will live longer than before, current food production will need to almost double to accommodate this population growth. Yet our current food production system is completely inefficient. It's unsustainable, and it really can't be scaled to meet the growing demands of this population. This is particularly true of our current system of producing protein through intensive animal agriculture. It's incredibly unlikely that we can further optimize the system, and even if we could, it would come at huge costs to the environment and to our societies. Nevertheless, we all need to eat, and this is why we need to innovate and completely rethink the way we produce our food from farm to fork. In terms of protein, there are 3 types of protein to replace that which is traditionally derived from animals: plant-based, cell-cultured, and fermentation-based proteins. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into all 3 of these categories later. But first, I want to share a little bit more about what the problem actually is. As I mentioned before, the world's population will reach, or is expected to reach, up to 9.8 billion by 2050. By 2030, 2/3 of this population will also be middle class. This is not necessarily a good thing for the food system, because statistics show that this rising affluence leads to an increased demand for meat. The meat industry is currently about 1.4 trillion in size, and this will double by 2040, which is actually very soon. So this represents one side of the problem, which is the demand side of the problem. Now, on the supply side, by the methods that we're currently using, we simply don't have enough land and resources to expand meat production any further. Only about 10% of land is arable, and 77% of it now is used for livestock, but only 33% of it of our protein comes from meat and dairy. This makes both the supply chain and the price of meat very unsustainable, as you can see by these articles here. And this fundamentally roots back to the problem that animals are extremely inefficient producers of protein. Like many different crops, we have domesticated livestock and different animals to great effect. We've optimized the animal production system to maximize meat really per dollar per day per second. However, even the most productive animals in terms of converting animal feed to meat still only achieve a conversion ratio of about 10%. It takes 9 calories of feed in the form of either soy, wheat, legumes to get 1 calorie of food out of chickens. And we need to grow the soy, wheat, or legume. The rest simply just goes into everything needed to keep the chicken or the animal alive, which can't be further optimized. Simply put, we have reached the limit of what nature can really do with animals. All this is without really mentioning that intensive animal agriculture is one of the most environmentally destructive forces in history. It contributes to about 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's the #1 user of fresh water on the planet. It's the #1 cause of deforestation. It drives up the costs of crops that could otherwise be used to feed people, and therefore it also entrenches global malnutrition. It's the #1 user of antibiotics, and this creates like a vicious cycle that increases the risk of antibiotic-resistant diseases. It's the primary cause of zoonotic diseases and animal-borne pandemics, from swine flu to mad cow disease. Finally, it has a very fragile supply chain, and it's fraught with concerns over how both animal and laborers in the industry are treated. Last, but definitely not least, consumption of meat, especially highly processed meat, is also linked to a lot of different lifestyle diseases, such as heart disease and cancers. But at the end of the day, a lot of people love eating meat. Meat, eggs, and dairy, they're delicious and they're culturally ingrained. So there's a clear supply and demand mismatch, and something needs to be done to address this. And the solution really is that we need to find alternative ways of growing protein products that we'd like to eat, but are more sustainable and healthier for you. And this really needs to be powered by technology and innovation. So I'm going to go through 3 different types of solutions that we currently have, and then elaborate a little bit more on the market. The first solution here is really plant-based meat analogs, which is manipulating ingredients like pea, soy, beans through technology to look and taste and feel like meat. There are a lot of these different products on the market. I think Impossible and Beyond are probably the most famous ones, but increasingly a lot of different brands as well that are available in Hong Kong and elsewhere. Plant-based meat analogs are much more sustainably produced than their conventional counterparts. And recent data has also shown that consumers have not only embraced these alternatives, but consumers, especially those of a younger generation, like Sonalie mentioned, especially millennials, are really demanding more of these products. And within Asia, we're already getting our own regional varieties. So in the very near future and currently, won't just be burgers and patties, but you'll be able to see them in dumplings, noodles, and stir fries. The second solution here is cultivated meat, which is growing real meat. It's molecularly exactly the same, just in a bioreactor, similar to how you would brew beer, and not in an animal. So although this industry still faces significant hurdles, such as unit economics, regulatory approvals that need to be obtained, we need to build the infrastructure to scale up, costs are dropping significantly over time, and the sector is rapidly evolving. The technology has really already been proven, and it now just needs to be continually optimized for commercial adoption. And here you can see some photos of products that are already lab grown. And the third technology I wanted to share a little bit more about today is that of precision fermentation, which allows us to use existing organisms, yeast, mycelium, organisms that we can find readily available in nature as vessels to produce protein. This technology is cheap and it's very scalable while creating proteins that are fundamentally the same as the ones that you would derive from an animal. This is a category that's only emerged a few years ago, but there are already products in the market. Perfect Day, actually you'll find a brand in Hong Kong that you can find in Park and Shop called Ice Age that actually also uses that technology. So I would encourage you guys to check it out. And it's really the fact that I think the pace and adoption of this technology really shows its disruptive potential. So why does all of this matter? Let's talk a little bit about the opportunity this change presents. Firstly, traditional animal agriculture, as we know it, will gradually become less and less economically competitive. And the alternative protein industry is just starting to grow, bringing with it extensive commercial opportunities. There are more and more entrepreneurs creating disruptive companies in the food tech space, and food tech startups are demonstrating really robust fundraising traction. And there's also been a very active M&A and exits environment in this space. And likewise, you can see some of the biggest food corporates, really from Cargill, Mars, ADM, Danone, Kellogg's, who are really starting to get involved in this space. We're also seeing increasing government policy in favor of the growing all-protein industry. Here you can see also the Prime Minister of Israel really trying some of that cultivated meat that is created in a lab. And here in Hong Kong and China, the alternative protein market is expected to grow really rapidly in the coming years. I'm going to speak really briefly about Brinc and how we fit into all of this. Brinc, as mentioned, we're a global venture accelerator and a venture capital firm that invests in and supports the growth of startups who are creating a more sustainable and equitable future. We invest through our different accelerator programs. We have 12 different programs globally, and 2 are focused on ag tech. And we have an extensive global network of mentors and partners who work with us to accelerate the growth of startups that are really making an impact and changing the way we feel, eat, live, and move. Within food tech, we invest in alternative protein, novel ingredients, functional foods, such as things like sugar reduction, side stream valorization, which is a topic I think a lot of our speakers have spoken on this evening, food waste reduction, sustainable food packaging, food supply chain and logistics, anything that really makes our food system more efficient, more sustainable, and more healthy. And we take a very, very bespoke approach to supporting each startup in our portfolio, from really connecting them to mentors, to our network of partners, to helping them secure further funding, supporting them on their product development and technical needs, refining their commercialization and growth strategy. It really depends on what each startup needs. And this is a little bit on our portfolio, our agri-food tech portfolio. This is actually 50 plus now, including our latest batch of investments. And I would encourage you to check it out on our website, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions on them. Lastly, also please feel free to reach out if you're an entrepreneur in the food tech space, if you'd like to become a mentor, a partner, an investor to our startups. We'd be more than happy to share more. Thank you very much for your time. Please find my contact details here, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, Natalie. Thank you so much for sharing a lot of these insights on the food technology. I'm sure that there is much more to be learned. Obviously, there's like a very complex system. It's not so maybe easy to grasp it only in this short time, but I think it was a good overview, or the sort of a snapshot of what it is for those who are not so familiar with that. And I'd like to open, of course, the Q&A session, our last one for today, to those of you who have any questions. So in our challenge, we're looking at transforming the waste into solutions. So maybe some of these technologies that Natalie mentioned could be used for repurposing some of the food waste into new solutions. So I think Sonalie mentioned earlier as well about new materials derived from actually food waste into new packaging materials. So there are lots of opportunities. And for those of you who, not only for those of you who come from the sciences background, but even for others, you might, by just looking at the different technologies or studying a little bit more about this sector, maybe come up with interesting ideas. Actually, I think here is a lot of space for being creative and thinking outside of the box. So maybe you don't even come from the same space, but you can really think across these different disciplines and how you can apply maybe your expertise into this new model or knowledge of a material into actually creating something really interesting for the market. So we've got some questions that are coming through, and I will let you answer those. So we've got from Vincent, is insect a solution? Is it considered a solution in the alternative protein market?
Yes, I think it definitely is. Actually, right before Brinc, I was working with a startup in Australia that was deploying a circular economy solution involving insects. I think the potential of insects is often more less direct for consumer, but more in animal feed. So we were working with black soldier flies, where the larvae would eat food waste, so farm output, fruit and vegetable waste, and that protein would be milled as a substitute to feed animals, rather than using, say, wild-caught fish meal to feed farmed fish or chicken. We would then use a solution that is essentially a circular economy solution within nature to feed those animals. Of course, this is partially a partial solution. There are solutions that feed insects sort of directly to people, but there's always that ick factor. So always a question of, I think, consumer education and adoption. But I think it can definitely be part of the solution.
Great, thank you for your answer. And I think we've got another question on alternative protein startups. So how are alternative protein startups ensuring the nutritional value of their products? Or how does the nutritional value of alt protein compare to traditional meat?
That's a great question. I think in terms of, in terms of cultured meat and precision fermentation, these products are identical to those that are derived from animals. So you are just using a different mechanism to grow the same proteins. So they're exactly the same in terms of its nutritional value. And I would say in terms of plant-based meats, quite a common criticism of the first generation of plant-based meat products is that they're not necessarily healthy for you in, say, for a burger. But when you're eating a burger, you're not really thinking about your health anyway, right? So you have to really compare apple to apple. You can't really compare a plant-based meat to, say, a salad. And I think a lot of the second and third generation of these plant-based products, that's what the iteration and focus will be, focusing on products that taste as good, are as cheap, that people love, that are healthy for you, and have like a clean label that's simple and easy to understand.
Thank you. I think that's a really interesting insight and the way to think about it as well. I mean, as you said, we're already eating so much different types of foods and we don't really scrutinize them that much. And then, of course, there are these alternative proteins that we kind of ask a lot of questions, right? So either we have to be consistent as well with our questioning of the other food choices that we make, and then maybe there's a reason to be concerned. But otherwise, I think, as you said, and I also believe that if we want to be consuming some of these things or meat, and we should be also regulating how much we use. So same with this, like you probably don't want to be eating burger every day. So if that's the aim, I don't think that's maybe the best choice in any of these alternatives, right? Great. Do we have any more questions from the audience I'd like to ask for the last round? Or otherwise, you can also find Natalie, I'm sure, or reach out to Brinc directly if you are a founder or someone who is working with alternative protein, and perhaps maybe through this process of the innovation, you will come up with some interesting solutions, and we will have Natalie with us work through this process and her colleagues from Brinc. So maybe there will be some more opportunities for you to exchange ideas on that in particular. Now I think there are still some other questions. I know that some of you might have some logistical questions and so on. However, we will be sending over more information on that as well to all of the participants who would like to continue into the challenge. For now, I would like to really thank all of our speakers for your insightful presentations. It was great to have you. And we will try to, in some shape or form, also share those insights with those who will move on into the innovation stage to look into the solutions to these three challenges that we presented today. So just a recap for those of you who are here, we will be looking at three challenges: food technology, sustainable packaging, and textile innovation. And we are thinking about the circular systems, as Dr. Chopra has mentioned at the beginning. So we will share more information for those of you who would like to continue into the next stages of this innovation challenge. And just to wrap up the session, I'd like to mention again that this program is funded by the Innovation Technology Commission, and we're very grateful for the support so that we can innovate together for a more sustainable hospitality and tourism industry. I would like to also acknowledge again our partners, our sponsor, venue sponsor Eaton Club, and our program partner, the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park, as well as our event sponsors, Invest Hong Kong, Food Panda, and Chopra. I also would like to mention our content partners, who are either the speakers today, or like Brinc and the Mills Fabrica, or the ones who will be preparing some interesting workshops for you later, such as Hong Kong Rita, Maker Bay, and FSI, Foundation for Shared Impact. And lastly, I would like to mention also our community partners who have helped to spread the word about these challenges: the European Chamber of Commerce, Life Without Knives, the British Consulate General of Hong Kong, American Chamber of Commerce, and the Environmental Society of the Students of HKUST. So I believe that's all from us today. And I would like to thank you again for taking your time, joining our kickoff event. Hopefully we're going to see you in the next stages. So our team, Dilpreet and Lucian, will be in touch with you. And if you have any questions, we'll be more than happy to answer. And we're going to start moving on to actually creating the ideas, starting to think about the solutions that you can bring over into the next stage of this hackathon. So thank you very much for attending, and I'll wish you a nice evening.
Hi, Deepen. It's good. We can leave now.
Yes, feel free, ladies. Thank you so much for the help. We can reconvene tomorrow.
Yes, we will share with you the folder if we snap all the content, and we will share with you guys.
Actually.
Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good evening. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.